I'd like to welcome you to Honey Hill Orchard. I own the orchard, and with the help of some family and our orchard employees who we consider family, we run the orchard and get the work done so that we can get apples to everyone. My parents started the orchard in 1977, so we've been here for quite a while.
My name is Kirk Bach. I'm a brother-in-law to Kathy. I've been with the orchard operation since 1992.
A lot of people think that the only time we have much to do with the orchard is in the fall when we're picking apples, and that is the busiest time of year, but we're really working with the trees through most of the year. These apples here are called a Spartan, and what we have to do in the wintertime, if you think about the trees have no leaves on them all through the winter, they're out here, but you can see the trees get pretty tall. They grow a lot during the summer. And we don't want the trees to get too tall so that the apples are way up at the top and we can't pick them. So we give the trees kind of like a haircut to keep them from getting too long. So we go along in the wintertime and we cut back branches. To kind of keep them at a manageable height so it's easier to pick. Then after we're done with our pruning in the wintertime, when spring comes, the apples form little blossoms. So the whole orchard is filled with little white flowers. We have our own honeybees, and the honeybees pollinate the flowers, which helps the apples start to develop and grow. And apples grow all summer long till we get this time of the year where we're ready to pick them. But even in the summertime, when we're done with the pruning and the bees have pollinated, we still have a lot of work to do in the orchard. We have to keep the grass cut under the trees. And we also spray our apples. We try not to spray them too much. We watch for when insects are coming into the orchard. Kind of like when you might spray off on yourself to keep mosquitoes from biting you. We spray some things on the apples to keep insects from biting them and getting into them. Then when we get to this time of the year, we are ready to start picking. But not all the apples are ready at the same time. We have about 15 different varieties of apples. Some of them start ripening in early September. Others aren't ripe until we get to middle of October. And there's lots of different kinds of apples for different uses. Some people just want to eat apples, so we have wonderful eating apples. But if somebody wants to bake a pie, they'll choose a different variety that's good for baking. We also make caramel apples, and we make our own apple cider out of our apples. So when we get ready to pick, Kirk is going to show you how we do that and some of the equipment we use.
So when we're ready to pick apples, we have some equipment that we bring out with us. The wood crate is what we put the apples into. This is what we use to pick apples. It's an apple picking bag that we put on and fill it up. Once the bag is full, instead of just standing here and pouring them in, because apples are pretty sensitive and tender, we don't want to bruise them. What's special about the bag is the bottoms open up where you can set the bag down in, let them glide out, and that way you're not bruising them or cutting them or damaging them. Also, there is a proper way to pick an apple. These trees, I'm going to pick one just so you can see it. These trees have set their buds for the year, for next year's crop. So, I don't know if you can see that. There's a couple buds on this. That's going to be next year's crop. So we try to educate our clientele, especially with the little kids, that the best way to pick an apple is just don't come up and yank. And there's a reason for that. It usually, the branches on these trees are very soft and tender. It tends to do damage to them. But if we pick every apple like this, we're not going to have a crop next year. Okay, the best way to pick an apple without doing any damage to the trees or the buds for next year, I take the palm of my hand, put it at the bottom of the apple, and just give it a slight twist. Most of the time that will work, but if it doesn't, then it's okay to give a slight little tug and it should come off. So it's kind of nice for people to know there is a right and a wrong way for picking these. Now, we also, when we pick, we also don't like to climb the trees because, like I just said, these are very tender trees. It doesn't take much to snap or bruise a branch. So this is a special ladder we use that it can actually go down the center of the tree where we can climb it and pick without damaging the tree. The ones way up, we like to use the pole picker where you can reach up to the top, put the apple inside, give it just a little slight twist, and usually there's a pad in here that the apple can fall down to.
After we get done picking some of our apples, we load them on wagons and the boxes that we used for hauling for picking. And then we bring them into our cooler, which is really a giant refrigerator. Keeps the apples fresh. Apples will ripen 10 times faster at room temperature than they will in the cooler. So it's really important to keep them in a cool place. So we have them in there. We also, as we're bagging up apples, getting them ready to sell, we store the bags in our cooler until we need to bring them out into our store. This machine here is called an apple grater, and it sorts out apples according to different sizes. You can see over here some of the boxes, bushel boxes that we've brought out from our cooler because we need to get them ready for selling. So the first thing we do is we end up putting them on this machine, and they ride on a conveyor. There's some brushes under this part of the machine that spin around and clean off any dirt or leaves that might still be on the apples. Then the apples fall through a chain link that has different sizes. If I put a big apple on there, we could see it doesn't fall through. If I put this smaller apple on, it falls through, rolls into a box. These we save for apple cider. Even though they're small, they still are tasty, juicy, so they make great apple cider. Then any of the larger apples end up on this table where we're ready to get them sorted and looked at for our store. But we can't just grab every apple and put it into a bag. Each one has to be picked up and inspected to make sure it looks good for selling. It's like this one is a beautiful apple. These are Jonathan apples. They're really good for eating and baking, cooking. So we put them in our bags then. And those go into the cooler till we need them for our store. Sometimes though, we end up with one that have some spots on them, maybe a little bruise. This can happen when it's hanging in the tree, and if a branch is continually rubbing on it as it's growing, it might get some marks on it. So those we also save for cider. This one has a little black spot on it. Doesn't hurt the apple underneath. Still juicy, great tasting, just a skin blemish. So those go into cider, so nothing really goes to waste. So we'll turn on the machine and we'll watch how it works, and you can see it's kind of a fun machine to watch. Our cider press. On all the apples that we showed you earlier that are maybe too small or they have a spot on the skin or a bruise, come in here to be pressed into apple cider. They come in through this window and they go through a washer that has brushes again that really scrub the apples to clean them. They drop into here and ride up this conveyor, kind of like an escalator for apples. They then drop into that silver part of the machine, which is a grinder, and it grinds the apples up. The apple peeling, core, seeds, everything is ground up, and it funnels down and drops into that cone. From there, the chopped up apples are pumped into this part of the machine. This is actually the part that's called the cider press, or where it gets its name. The chopped up apples are pumped into these cloths, and then the cloths are folded up, and you can see we've got several layers of folded cloths of pulp. This is then moved under this part, which presses down, again for the cider press coming from this, presses down, and as it presses down, it squeezes out all the juice of the apples, but all the seed skin, which we call pulp, stays in these cloth bags, which is then emptied out. Now here I've got a little bit of the apple pulp that's been ground up. This one hasn't gone through the press yet. So you see, if I squeeze it, I'm kind of like a cider press. I'm getting the cider out. This is some that has already been pressed, and if I squeeze it, I can get a couple drops out. But that's then all that's left. Now, even this doesn't go to waste. This we haul out into our fields, and it can be used as fertilizer. It can be spread. Now, a long time ago, there was a man named Jonathan Chapman. You guys might know him better as Johnny Appleseed. And he used to go to places that press cider, and he would go through all of this apple pulp, and he'd pick out the apple seeds. Here you see one, I've got one here. And he would put these seeds into bags that he carried then around the countryside to be able to plant them for new trees for settlers who were moving out into the Midwest, east of the eastern states. So as I said, all this goes into fertilizer then, so we're not wasting anything.
From the press room, the cider gets pumped through this hose into our cider tank. This is a refrigerated unit that keeps the cider cool. So to get this started, each nozzle has to be primed. And each nozzle can be set to the size of the container, and it will stop at a certain point. Once it's primed, it usually stays primed, so it makes it easier for changing out the jugs to keep filling. Besides bottled cider, we also make our apple cider donuts with this cider. Once they're all going, it should stay primed. And I evidently have it set right because it's stopped right where we need it to. We just lift up on the nozzle, give it a little more cider so it kind of pulls the air out, and you get a full gallon. From here, Aaliyah will wipe it down, tap it, and then we put it on the trays, and we put them in the big cooler until we're ready to put it out on the display. So that's how the bottling process works.
Thank you so much for visiting with us today. We hope maybe we showed you something that you hadn't known before and you learned some new things.